Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery and it's check-in time for my night crawlers. In my green bin here I've got African night crawlers, or at least I was led to believe that they were African night crawlers when I originally got the cocoons that they all hatched out of. A lot of viewers have commented that they don't think that they're night crawlers, so I figured I would just mention that here in the beginning so that when we poke around in here to look at it, I'd love to hear from people that definitely have night crawlers, to hear if they believe that these are or are not night crawlers. Because who knows, maybe they are something else, but up until now I've always been considering them as African night crawlers. And if there's something else, I'd like to know what they are exactly. And the worms in this VERMIBAG mini over here, these are European night crawlers. And I don't think I've ever had anybody comment on, suggesting that maybe they're not European night crawlers. So I'm pretty sure what's in here are European night crawlers. And a week's passed since we last checked in on these and given them food. In the case of this bin, the food that we gave the bin was really intended to be its final feeding, and we're kind of letting the bin get into starving mode, or an expression I think I heard somebody mention in the comments is foraging mode, meaning they're not getting any fresh food, but that doesn't mean that there's no food in the bin. There's definitely food remaining in the bin, and the whole idea here is to just give them time to really break any little remaining scraps down so that we really do end up with just a bin full of nothing but castings. Here in this VERMIBAG mini, it's a continuous flow through system, pretty large capacity, plenty of room to keep going here, so I'm not in a hurry to start winding this one down. So today it just gets a regular feeding. And here, even though we're not feeding, we are going to check in just to see how things are progressing. So let's start in here, give them the food that they're getting, and then we'll proceed over to the African night crawlers. In the past I had another piece of cardboard covering this piece of cardboard that's got the diatomaceous earth all over it. I just figured I'd simplify, so I've eliminated that top covering of cardboard and remain with that one that we just took off now only. And here we've got our worms all hanging out, coming up for the moisture that collects on the plastic there. As the plastic within the bin tries to evaporate, the plastic sheet catches it, allows it to condense and drop back down into the bin, making this top surface a nice tempting place for the worms to come hang out. Out here on the edge where there was no plastic, the material's a little bit more dry, so that stuff's not yet broken down. We'll just push this stuff aside because this will make great cover over the top of the bin when we're done here. Last time I fed a somewhat curious food item. In the past I had always taken corn cobs whole and threw them into my worm bins. However, this time I took a bunch of corn cobs and I chopped them into little slices so that each corn cob now consisted of many little tiny discs. And my hope was that would help speed up the breakdown of the corn cobs, because if you don't do that, I'm sure you know, if you've ever tried composting corn cob in your worm bins, or if you've ever watched any of my channel, you'll know that corn cobs on their own just take forever to get broken down. So I'm just going to be curious, even though it's only been a week now, I'm going to be curious to see how they're approaching the breakdown of those bits of corn. It's like here's a couple of them are already surfacing, and I could see worms hanging out by them. Now there was other food added here too besides the chopped up corn last time. Last time I did sprinkle coffee across the top surface of the feeding, and in addition to the corn cob bits I also included fragments of potato skins, which I don't know if I'm really seeing any of. I am seeing some really thin pieces of something in here, and it makes me wonder if that could be remnants of the potato skins. It probably is, where any of the meaty stuff that was still on the potato skins was already consumed, and it's really just the outer skin at this point that remains. So it does seem like they're beginning to break down the food that we gave them last time. That's good. A couple of the other things that we're bumping into down here are some slow composting items that I've been tracking in my bins now for some time. Not even sure what this is. I know that at one point I had put in an avocado seed, and it makes me wonder if this might be that. Except the avocado seed is so hard. This feels like it's softening up a little bit. In fact, I just pressed on it and a little bit of juice actually is coming out of it. So I've never really tried composting these. If this is what it is, I think if it is the avocado seed, then I've got no experience or way of telling whether it's behaving normally or if it's breaking down properly or not. It's my first time trying to compost those. And since they are such a hard, tough item, I really don't expect it to happen quickly. Other hard, tough items that I've got in my bins are these mango seeds, also a very slow composting item usually. So more recently I've been trying to expose the inside of the seed to the worms, either by sawing the seed into pieces. Like here you can see I sawed a piece off of it. I've also just tried puncturing the outer husk of the seed in the hopes that that might just be enough to allow infiltration. Alright, so I've excavated a little bit of a pit over here to drop today's feeding into. Today's feeding is going to consist of watermelon rinds. This is going to bring a fair bit of moisture to the bin, and I think the moisture is okay in here. I don't think that there's a dryness happening, although maybe on the outer edge you might consider it to be a little bit drier than it needs to be. So maybe I'll take some of that more dry stuff from the outer edge and use that to cover up with. Maybe it'll benefit from receiving a little bit of moisture that comes off of those pieces of watermelon rind. But you know what? I've also got a little bit of coffee as well, so let's give them this too. This is just a little bit of spent coffee, maybe just one day's worth. Certainly not much, but just figured I'd get rid of that as well while we're in here. And then we can use all this remaining leafy matter to cover up with. You may have noticed when we first got in here there was a number of little flying insects, I don't know, gnats or fruit flies or whatever they were. That just seems to be a little bit of an ongoing saga in this bin, and I've been just trying to cope with that situation. That's why we got a fair bit of leafy matter across the top, so I'm hoping that maybe in time we'll stop seeing them. But if the problem persists, I've gotten lots of great ideas from people on how to cope with the situation. So for now, I'm just letting it ride. But we'll see. Maybe at some point we'll take some other approach to try to deal with it. Oops. Let's get this thing back in the corner where it belongs. I'm not zipping up the lid, just leaving it open to the air the way it is, the way you see it here. And oops, I almost forgot one thing. Oops. Right underneath the cardboard, we would normally position this sheet of plastic to help maintain the moisture level in here, not to let all the moisture evaporate out. All right, one more time. Over to the African nightcrawlers. The last time we were in this bin, when it was still at the age of 76 days old, it had received its 10th feeding. Similar foods to what we had fed the European nightcrawlers with last time. The chopped up corn cobs as well as the potato skins and some coffee. Same exact type of food was added in here, so I'm sure we'll bump into that if we start poking around to examine the material in here. Now, you can see a couple worms hanging out on the top surface here, and a whole lot of freshly deposited castings. In fact, I think only over here is where I can still see the chunks the way we left it last time we were in here when we stirred everything up. tried to level things off, and this is kind of what it looked like. So all this new casting material is freshly deposited, because there is a good number of worms in here, and a lot of them are coming to the surface because they, they're seeing the moisture collect up top here, coming up to take advantage of that, and the main reason I put the plastic on to capture any moisture that might try to evaporate is because, for some time this bin was left uncovered, trying to allow the material in the bin to air out a little bit. Because it was starting to seem to me like the material in here had gotten overly damp, and I wanted it to air out, and it did nicely. It aired out pretty good, but what we were left with is a bunch of stuff that, if you ever felt dry worm castings, they clump up into these little balls, and they're very hard to break apart. So this piece last week was probably a dry piece of material that I could not have just broken up like this between my fingers. So there was a fair bit of that in here, larger chunks that were kind of dry, and they got mixed in with the rest of the more damp material that's in the bin, in the hopes that they would soften up and become more pliable. And I don't necessarily plan to go through the bin looking for each such chunk to break it up by hand like this. I am sort of counting on the worms to eventually, stumble on all those old pieces of compost and break them up for me, so that maybe in the end we've just got a whole bunch of nice loose castings like this. I do like the way the material feels. I don't think I'm sensing any of that overly damp material like I did last week. And that was because a lot of this stuff that had been out on the top surface and had dried and become kind of clumpy was all mixed in together with the more damp stuff that was below. And I think that a lot of the moisture has exchanged from being in the overly damp pieces over into the pieces that were a little bit overly dry. And things are, I think, equalizing out pretty nicely here. I'm trying to, inspect this sort of carefully, because I don't want to have too much of this food that I placed in here last time all over the top surface. I'd prefer to have it down within the material. But I do want to see how the stuff down low is coming along. Is it still overly damp, or has blending in the dry stuff that was previously on the surface helped to absorb some of the moisture and dry it off a bit? I believe it has. The stuff just seems a little bit more crumbly overall throughout than it did previously. So that's really the direction that I was hoping it would go. And I think I will continue to keep the coverings on this just the way they were, because they seem to be working nicely. I feel like if I were to allow for a lot of moisture to just escape the bin, we might end up with overly dry material again. I think the level of moisture in here right now is pretty much ideal to make it comfortable everywhere throughout the bin for the worms to, feel cozy enough to go into any reaches of the bin, looking around for remaining scraps of food to break down. I wouldn't want any one portion of the bin to start to become overly dry and then have the worms avoiding that area. Right now, since I am sort of starving this bin, the aim is to have the worms take advantage of all the remaining food scraps that are scattered throughout the bin, as well as this most recent feeding of corn and potato and coffee. But it's been a week now since they received their last feeding, and I think it's going to just take a little bit of time for some of these, larger chunks of bedding type material to break down, all the remaining food scraps to break down. So I am anticipating it taking, maybe a month, month and a half, who knows, maybe longer, before we start seeing fewer and fewer scraps of remaining food or bedding in here. I was really just most interested in seeing if our blending of the material last week and then us covering it up to sort of cap off the moisture in the bin was working correctly, and I believe it is. So at this point, all I'm doing is taking any of the larger chunks of food that I stumbled on and kind of poking them down into the material. I'd prefer to have them down in the material. And I do like to start out with a sort of level surface across the top. And I believe the next time we come in here, we'll probably see more of the same, which is a whole bunch of freshly deposited castings throughout the entire top surface. So I'm not even sure if it's going to be necessary to keep checking in on this one. I just thought that after a week's time, I wanted to see if things were equalizing, and I believe they have. So in this bin, I believe it might just be safe to let it ride for a while and just leave it be, and it won't require a whole lot of hands-on interaction for a while in its present mode. So I think things look really nice here. I'm going to cover up so we can let these little guys get back to work. And then I got a little bit of cleaning up to do around here as well before I can call it a day. But I won't bore you with that. I'll just take this as a quick chance to say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to give me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. Also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.